this is 2b. We're finding the angle of this triangle, right? A missing angle of a triangle using our trig functions. So this one's going to require a little new button on the calculator that we'll start out with. So if you take a look at your calculator, you'll notice that it's got these buttons above sine, cosine, and tangent that has sine with like that little -1. What that really means is the inverse sine, and inverse is opposite. So if we take the sine of an angle to get those decimals, those ratios, if we do the opposite of that, we should get back to the angle. So the goal here is to find an angle, right? Get backwards, get to that angle. So just really quick practice for you guys to find out the inverse sine of these functions. We're going to just type them in the calculator by typing in second sine, right? So second sine, and then we type in the fraction, so 4/5. When we do that, we get our answer. So for this first one here, we're going to round to the nearest tenth of a degree, so 53.1 degrees. We'll do the second one, same thing with the second, so inverse cosine of 1 divided by 3. When we do that, we end up with the angle 70.5 degrees. And then finally, we do have the same thing here with the inverse tangent, right? So same thing, just second tangent this time, and then we type in the number and hit enter, and we get our answer of 71.6 degrees for this one. And so we're just kind of like working with that inverse sine, inverse cosine, or inverse tangent button, or second sine, second cosine, second tangent. All right, so we're going to continue a little more practice kind of getting what does this look like with the triangle. So kind of like the last one, it's very similar steps. We're going to first decide sine, cosine, or tangent, right? Which one of the SOHCAHTOA functions we're working with. Then we'll make our equation. The difference is with our equation, instead of cross multiplying, we're going to use this inverse button. So when we're looking at our first triangle here, we will label our sides. So the 4 is our opposite for this angle x that we're working with here. 7 is the hypotenuse, and there's an unknown side, that's the adjacent. Since we know something about the opposite and the hypotenuse, we're going to use that sine, the sine function. So when we write the equation, we still say the sine of the angle, in this case it's x, equals 4, the opposite, over 7. Now in order to solve this, we're going to apply the inverse. Now when we apply the inverse function, what happens is it cancels out over here on the left, right? We're applying the inverse or the opposite function, and then you're left with x equals the inverse sine of that fraction, that 4/7. So really, our goal is we just type that into the calculator. So again, just kind of looking at that again, we'll type in the second sine of 4 divided by 7, type in that fraction, and we'll get our angle, right, that missing angle. So that tells us that x to the nearest tenth of a degree is 34.8 degrees. Right, that would be our final answer. So we're just looking for that missing angle. We're using the second sine, the second cosine, or the second tangent buttons to do that. So let's take a look at a couple examples here. So for our first one, again, I'm going to write SOHCAHTOA, right, just to kind of get us going here. Is it sine, is it cosine, or is it tangent? Now in our case here, this first question, we're taking a look at angle x right here. And when we label our sides, we have an opposite and we have an adjacent. We don't know what the hypotenuse is. So a function that deals with the opposite and the adjacent is our tangent function. So we'll write our equation. The tangent of x is equal to the opposite 10 over the adjacent side 9. Now again, solving for this, we're going to find the inverse tangent. We're going to do that to both sides. Take the inverse tangent of both sides. And when we do that, the inverse tan and tan cancel. We have x equals the inverse tangent of 10/9. And when we type that in the calculator, you should get x equals 48 it rounds to a 0, right? So 48.0 degrees. For our next problem, same thing. Let's work with our SOHCAHTOA, right? Sine, cosine, and tangent to figure out which one we're working with. So the angle that we're focused on here is going to be this angle x. We don't know the opposite. We do know the hypotenuse, and we do know the adjacent. So the function where we know the adjacent and the hypotenuse, we're going to decide is tangent. Cosine, right? So the cosine of our angle is equal to the adjacent side over the hypotenuse, 8 over 15. So we'll apply that inverse, and if you guys are kind of, seeing that inverse is always going to cancel out on the left-hand side, but we have to apply that operation to both sides. We end up with x equals the inverse cosine of 8 over 15. So again, type that in the calculator real fast, and we find out that our missing angle is 57.8 degrees. All right, last problem. Same thing. SOHCAHTOA, right? Start with what trig function are we going to be using here? Always helpful to label, so we know that we're dealing with this angle x right here. The opposite side is known, and the hypotenuse is known. We're missing that adjacent, right? We don't know anything about the adjacent side. So we could use sine, right? Sine deals with the opposite and the hypotenuse. So the sine of angle x is equal to 18 over 23. And as we want to find angle x, we use that inverse sine operation to both sides. And we end up with x equals the inverse sine of 18 over 23, which when you type that in, you should get 51.5 degrees. So listen, keep practicing these. They get easier and easier the more you do. And then check in when you're done with this page.